Hey folks, author MJ Gallagher here and welcome back to Rebirth Revealed, a series presented and funded by KupoCon. This episode covers the details and lore you may have missed from Chapter 5, Blood in the Water. Spoilers beyond this part of the game are minimal, but as always, please be aware of likely spoilers for the original Final Fantasy VII, its remake, and the compilation in general. So let's hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and cruise on in. Chapter 5 opens with the Shinra 8 passenger ferry, which our heroes boarded at the end of the previous chapter, as it sails across the Meridian Ocean from Junon to Costa del Sol. The camera swoops around to provide pleasant views of the sun deck, and we are greeted by two familiar faces in the shape of Andrea Rudea and Madame M, in addition to an unfamiliar female. The latter's presence here sets up her role in the forthcoming Queen's Blood tournament, as well as her significantly deeper connection to the subplot associated with the card game. The Shinra 8, of course, is a fun reimagining of the cargo ship from Final Fantasy VII. That incarnation was populated primarily by a crew of Shinra personnel, whereas Rebirth has included a variety of NPCs, allowing the group to blend in while dressed in their own outfits, rather than having to remain in military uniforms. Nevertheless, there are a couple of fun callbacks to the original, such as Barrett pausing to admire his sailor suit in the mirror, just as he does at the Costa del Sol Inn if he's not in the player's party, or Red 13 walking upright like a human, which reflects his attempts to maintain his Shinra trooper disguise. In fact, the theme music that plays during the cargo ship sequence in the old game is titled "It's Hard to Stand on 2 Feet" for this exact reason. Another throwback that's slightly less obvious is the voice coming from behind the locked door to the hold where the black-robed figures are being contained. As is confirmed later in the chapter, the voice belongs to Yuffie, who, amid her demands to be let out, is experiencing a bout of seasickness. Yuffie is an optional character in Final Fantasy VII, so her presence on the cargo ship is entirely dependent on whether the player has recruited her before reaching Junon. If they do though, speaking to her on the boat will reveal she's incredibly seasick. As for the Shinra 8 itself, its design is substantially different from its predecessor, but it does appear to be the same in-universe vessel class. For example, when Barrett is spying on Rufus and Heidegger in the original, there's a giant F-59 painted on the ground. This class identifier can also be seen above the sun deck in Rebirth. A little bit of easy to miss lore is provided too. There's a pair of crewmates in the second class area that are discussing how the ship once belonged to Captain Titov's grandfather, but Shinra took it from him after the war with the Republic and repurposed it as a cruise liner. The name Titov itself roughly means descendant of Titus, or could be interpreted as descended from strength, which could be a descriptor of Titov's grandfather. At the front of the sun deck, there's a lady leading group stretches, similar to Master Zangin's calisthenics club in Nibelheim during Chapter 1. This time around, the poses are known as the Spearhawk, the Sholopod, and the Terror of the Deep. All three of these are coastal monsters encountered during Rebirth. The first two are local to the Costa del Sol region, and the latter is the water serpent that was battled in the cove at Under Junon. The Terror of the Deep card is also a reward for winning the Queen's Blood tournament. As would be expected aboard such a passenger ferry, there are a number of posters and advertisements on the walls. I've discussed a few of these already in the series, such as references to the Emerald and Ruby weapons of Final Fantasy VII, or to the character Zell from Final Fantasy VIII. Zell also has some matching limit break art for Tifa, but there are two others worth drawing your attention to in this chapter. The first is the image of the red Cessna seaplane flying above some palm trees. In the original game, a similar craft is berthed at the Costa del Sol harbour, close to where the cargo ship docks. The second, however, is substantially more interesting. I mentioned in my episode covering the Junon Upper City that there's a billboard for Loveless G Edition, a theatrical performance taking place at the Gold Saucer. Another ad for the same show can be found in the corner of the Shinra 8's Royal Lounge. In this image, however, a number of figures seem to be venerating a winged female, with particular focus on 3 males at the centre. While it may not be immediately apparent, we can actually discern who these individuals represent. The player Loveless is frequently advertised throughout Final Fantasy VII Remake, but it is most closely associated with the villain of Crisis Core, Genesis, who is sometimes known by the epithet G. Genesis, of course, was the first child to be successfully produced by the Jenova project. During Crisis Core, the player can interact with one of his fan clubs, the Study Group, whose members dedicate themselves to unravelling the mysteries of Loveless and the rogue soldier's interpretation of its story. At the centre of these mysteries is the gift of the goddess, which the 3 friends, themselves the protagonists of Loveless, set out in search of. In short, the poster on the ship depicts the goddess and the 3 friends of Loveless, who feature prominently in Genesis's recitals of the ancient poem. As for why this specific version of the promotional material appears here, that relates to a certain emergence later in the chapter, but the details of the connection won't be revealed until the Temple of the Ancients. Down in the cargo hold at the start of Chapter 5, Tifa and Aerith have concealed themselves among the crates and containers. They seem to be coming to the end of a conversation, in which Tifa asks, "Ever see that Faz guy again?" Contrary to the throwaway nature of the line, it carries an enormous amount of relevance. This is a direct reference to the character Faz Hicks from the official novel Traces of Two Pasts, authored by the Final Fantasy VII Saga's lead scenario writer Kazushige Najima. The book itself is separated into 3 sections. One of these explores Tifa's childhood and her life in Midgar after the Nibelheim incident. Another revolves around Aerith's escape from the Shinra building and her early years with her foster mother Elmira. To summarise, Faz was a technician who worked in Professor Hojo's lab and had a soft spot for Aerith's birth mother, Ifalna. When Aerith began showing signs that her Cetran abilities were awakening, Hojo's treatment of Ifalna intensified, and she eventually persuaded Faz to smuggle them out. He arranged for them to be transported to Midgar's slums, where he would rendezvous with them and give them a safe place to live. However, upon reaching the slums, Ifalna abandoned the plans, releasing Aerith into Elmira's care before she died. Many years later, Faz finds the young girl after she has run away from home, and accompanies her to the church in Sector 5. There, he tries to force Aerith to leave with him, but Elmira appears and attacks him with a broom. This incident is what first brings Aerith to the church, and is very possibly why she uses a staff or rod in battle. Interestingly, the 3rd section of Traces of Two Pasts is a short story titled Picturing the Past, which initially featured as part of Remake's World preview book. This tale provides information on Aerith's awakening, and the stress Hojo puts her under to trigger visions of Mako-rich locations around the planet. As it happens, Picturing the Past is also the origin story for many of the black-robed individuals in the Remake continuity. These men and women fell victim to Hojo's experiments after suffering overexposure to Mako while surveying the sites identified in Aerith's visions. It's unlikely to be a coincidence then that both the robed figures and Professor Hojo himself appear in this chapter. Back in the hold, Aerith turns the subject of the conversation to business, a code word for boys. This of course is a little nod to the so-called love triangle between herself, Tifa and Cloud, but it also aligns very well with the conclusion of her section in Traces of Two Pasts. Just as in Rebirth, her chat with Tifa is brought to a premature end when they hear footsteps approaching, but these belong to Cloud himself. As part of the Shinra 8's entertainment for the evening, Captain Titov hosts a Queen's Blood tournament. It seems this is a fairly regular occurrence, because the pink-haired girl from the opening cutscene is introduced as Regina, the reigning champion. I'll come back to Regina in a minute, but we've actually already encountered at least one other former winner in Rebirth. As I alluded to in my episode covering the side content of the Grasslands, Thorin has the tournament trophy on a shelf in his card shop. Registering for the competition is mandatory to progress the plot, and the sequence of having your heroes sign up has some humorous moments, especially Red 13's angry reaction to being denied access because he's considered an animal. What comes as a bit of a slap on the snout though is that there's at least one other non-human entity participating in the tournament. And while Cloud may elect to forfeit his involvement at any time, the scenario feels like a callback to Final Fantasy IX and the Tetra Master Tournament in Treno. If the player has defeated Keeper of the Crew or Cameron in a game of Queen's Blood at the Crow's Nest, as I discussed in the previous video, they will be treated to an extra piece of dialogue from the receptionist. He advises Cloud that a letter has been left behind the desk for him by a friendly spectre. The identity of the spectre won't be revealed for several chapters yet, but those paying attention to the early Queen's Blood lore could probably take an educated guess at who it is. The tournament itself consists of 5 rounds against opponents of increasing difficulty. In round 1, Cloud can choose to face off against either Felix, a random NPC whose name is the Latin word for lucky, or Wise 3.0, a robot with artificial intelligence that was created to become the world's greatest Queen's Blood player. This is suspiciously similar to episode Intermission, in which Chadley is discovered to be the Grandmaster of the Fort Condor minigame. The possible opponents of round 2 are Tifa, Aerith or Barrett. While Cloud has a bit of banter and friendly rivalry with each of his comrades, he remarks that Aerith challenging him will mean her funeral. Given the infamous events of the old Final Fantasy VII, that one is perhaps a touch too close to the bone. Meanwhile, if you defeat Barrett, he will glumly sing the Game Over music from the original title. This is reminiscent of Remake and how his humming of the victory fanfare and Chocobo theme were brilliant little Easter eggs for fans. Round 3's opponents can be either Madame M or Andrea Rodea, 2 people of influence in Wall Market that helped Cloud and Aerith gain entry to Don Corneo's mansion during Chapter 9 of Remake. Madame M is a renowned hand masseuse, which is why there are so many hand-based puns in her dialogue. Captain Titov even gets in on the act with his mid-match commentary, tossing out lines such as "This is no gentle massage" and "Madame M is crushing it." This is a reference to the various treatments available at her parlour in Wall Market, which Cloud most definitely remembers, because he looks at his hand when she alludes to the intimate moment they shared. Andrea himself is the proprietor of the Honeybee Inn, hence the presence of 2 honeybee girls in the Royal Lounge. Beating him will prompt some praise for Cloud's many talents, which harks back to their onstage dance together in Remake. As Cloud progresses towards a bout with Chadley in round 4, he begins to accumulate supporters, including the receptionist. The man is seen with a temporary tattoo of the blonde swordsman on his cheek, following the first couple of wins, and later with badges on his sash depicting Cloud's profile. Titov, meanwhile, repeatedly describes him as being hungry like the wolf for victory during matches. Hungry Like the Wolf is a well-known song from 80s pop group Duran Duran, but this is most probably a nod to the Fenrir motif adopted by Cloud in Advent Children. The 5th and final round of the tournament sees Cloud take on the Queen's Blood champion. She formally introduces herself at this time as Regina Connigan, Queen of Cards. This title may be a tribute to Final Fantasy VIII, a game also created by key members of Rebirth's development team such as Yoshinori Kitase, Tetsuya Nomura and Kazushige Najima. Final Fantasy VIII has its own Queen of Cards, a woman who travels from region to region and is the foremost authority on Triple Triad. It's worth noting that the Shinra 8 is not the last place we'll encounter Regina. What's even more significant is that her name carries much greater weight than initially meets the eye. Like Felix from round 1, Regina derives from Latin and means queen. It was typically used by the Romans as a moniker for Juno, the Queen of Heaven. and just in case there was any uncertainty over the relevance of that, Königin is the German word for queen, both in the context of a ruling monarch and the egg-laying female of an insect colony. The latter aspect is important to keep in mind. On a more abstract level, many players have speculated that there's a resemblance between Regina and the character Echidna from Squaresoft's beat-em-up game The Bouncer, released in the year 2000. While I'm not familiar with Echidna herself, she was designed by Tetsuya Nomura and shares a name with a female entity from ancient Greek mythology, the Mother of Monsters. Make of that what you will. I mentioned in my Under Junon episode that Final Fantasy VII's connection between the Shiva materia and Priscilla is represented in Rebirth through the ability to win Shiva's Queen's Blood card from a woman in the village. The same thing occurs in this chapter. In the old game, the Ifrit summon materia can be picked up after the battle with Jenova in the cargo ship Hold. Similarly, you can obtain the Ifrit card in Rebirth by defeating Regina, who may even play it during the match. As such, a direct link between her and Jenova can be established. I've already spoken in my Grasslands and Junon region videos about how the early narrative of the Queen's Blood subplot seems to suggest the game is related to Jenova in some way. Chapter 5 goes one step further by associating this entire tournament with the Calamity's reintroduction to the story. I can assure you, none of this is a coincidence. Cloud and the others are woken during the night to the sound of an alarm, and Titov requesting assistance from military personnel. It transpires that the ship is being attacked by monsters, with scores of them swarming the deck as the group tries to help. Among these fiends is the experimental Vargidpolis, which, as I explained in my episode covering the second half of the Nibelheim tragedy, should immediately evoke thoughts of testing on Jenova cells. During Cloud's flashback, comparable twin-brain creatures had escaped the pods at the Mount Nebo Mako reactor, while actual Vargidpolis enemies are fought in Remake at the underground Shinra facility. It is this exact reason that the fiends seek to integrate with the black-robed figures, who have themselves been injected with Jenova cells. The resulting mutation into the necrotic entities is itself a pseudo-reunion. In the cargo hold, Cloud and Tifa also encountered demonic entities, which are variants of the unknown entities battled in the underground facility and Professor Hojo's lab during Remake, and Shriekers, which are variants of the Screamer mini-boss on Mount Nibel during Cloud's flashback. Each of these locations, of course, is heavily associated with Jenova. Meanwhile, Captain Titov sends a distress call to Shinra HQ, and the nature of the attack means he is transferred to Hojo at the Research and Development Department. Eagle-eyed fans might have spotted that Hojo takes the call from the same monitor room that features in Chapter 17 of Remake, where he surveys the party as they try to navigate the drum. The Professor's presence in the Shinra building at this time is a deviation from the original game, in which the player learns after the Junon parade that Hojo has resigned from the company and vanished. The implication here is that he won't appear in Costa del Sol during the party's stay, but I guess we'll need to wait until the next episode to find out what happens. It's also worth pointing out that the scientist promises Titov pride of place in his laboratory if he can secure a specimen sample from the Jenova mutations. He instructs the captain to mark his body for identification, indicating that he doesn't expect there to be survivors. On a darker level, this is consistent with Hojo's standard practices, because the robed figures themselves are all tattooed, as is Red 13. In fact, part of Cloud's mental breakdown at the Northern Crater during Final Fantasy VII is that Hojo did not give him an identification number. Fighting their way to the engine room, Cloud and Tifa find Barrett protecting a group of black robes. Titov arrives soon after, and his plan is to shoot the cloaked figures before they can merge with the fiends, prompting Yuffie to drop her disguise and declare she isn't one of them. This is a rearrangement of the original scene, which itself has a manifestation of Sephiroth materialise before Cloud and the others, tell them that the time has come, and then hurl an arm of Jenova at them to trigger a battle. In Rebirth, however, it's revealed that the Black Cloaks have been carrying the mummified arm, and their frenzied scramble to retrieve it because the time has come for the reunion is what triggers Sephiroth to manifest through the illusionary powers of Jenova, before their bodies coalesce and fully transform into Jenova Emergent. As a side note, Yuffie's reaction to the swirls of purple mist here is a callback to episode Intermission, and the trauma she has from her run-in with the supernatural abilities of Nero the Sable. The enemy intel for Jenova Emergent verifies it's a fragment of the carcass stolen from the Shinra building at the end of Remake, and is fused with the robed individuals. It's also able to induce hallucinations that warp the space around it. I was always fascinated as a kid that the design of Jenova Birth, the original game's counterpart boss, included the grotesque metamorphoses of an arm and hand. According to the early material files of Final Fantasy VII's Ultimania Omega, this is a remnant from a draft version of the game, in which the black robes weren't carrying the body of Jenova, they were parts of the body itself. It was specifically the dismembered right arm of Jenova that was to be fought on the cargo ship. I love the reimagining in Rebirth of the many hands protruding from the monster's shoulder, thereby reinforcing the concept. If you look closely, you'll see that each of these is explicitly a right arm. And finally, the first phase of the clash against Jenova Emergent has the creature suspended from the ceiling via a pulsating, cocoon-like mass, with the battlefield plagued by an abundance of organic matter. The environment is reminiscent of the Jenova Dreamweaver encounter in Chapter 17 of Remake, rather than the fight against Jenova Birth in the old Final Fantasy VII. What's really curious about this is that emergence is the term used to describe insect larvae or other invertebrate young escaping from their egg or cocoon. Therefore, the exact nature of Jenova's birth here is given, and it's even represented in the cutscene between the first and second phases of battle. This brings us right back to what I said about Regina's surname, Connigan, and how it can also refer to an insect queen, the entity responsible for laying the eggs of her colony. As for what it all means, I'll save that for later in the series. Well guys, that's all for now. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I invite you to check out all future episodes on KupoCon's channel. If you're interested in the lore side of things, my own books, Norse myths that inspired Final Fantasy VII and Greek myths that inspired Final Fantasy VII, are both available on Amazon. As always, I'd especially like to thank all of KupoCon's Patreon subscribers for your continued support. Without your backing, productions such as this would not be possible. If you're not already a patron, please do consider joining for some incredible KupoCon exclusives. But for now, take care, I'm MJ Gallagher, and I'll speak to you again soon.